So we're going to be doing something a little bit different today. I have a series of 3 episodes planned, and they're going to be kind of based, or not kind of based, but based on what we are planning on doing with the YouTube channel. So if you're not aware, like you're not following me on LinkedIn and things, I've already shared a couple of LinkedIn posts, a couple of tweets, and a couple of threads, I think, actually, regarding an HTML crash course. And this is going to be for absolute beginners. And I watched a couple of HTML crash courses on YouTube, and many of them were sort of like full courses where this is like step 1 and you build out a whole like website and that. And then some other ones were covering multiple things. So they would actually like touch a lot on CSS and touch a lot on JS. And then I saw some others that were just older. And so, or part of a playlist. So it's kind of like, like there's this big thing to kind of take in. And so I thought it'd be interesting to try to do an audio version of an HTML crash course. And I want to focus specifically on HTML as much as possible without kind of touching too much on the stuff around it. Now, there is going to be a part of this episode in particular, because I feel like we're going to be able to rip through HTML, the basics, kind of rather quickly. And so we're going to be talking about some stuff that is still related to HTML, still in that vein. But we're going to be talking about kind of the importance of HTML and SEO. And so that's probably outside of the bounds of an HTML crash course. Now, I do want to say something that if you're like, man, this is for absolute beginners, I'm not an absolute beginner, I'm out of here for 3 weeks. That's not the case. Mike's still going to be doing his episodes every other week. And so I'm going to try to do, again, I'm just estimating, I'm going to do an HTML crash course, then a CSS, then a JS. Maybe I'll skip a week in between if something good comes up or something like that, or if this doesn't work out, what have you. But this is kind of where I'm at. And so this sounds.
I would also say, just quickly to interject, that even if you are a seasoned developer, it doesn't. I would recommend kind of at least listening to this, maybe put it on 2x, because we might bring up topics, or we might bring up tags like HTML tags, or we might bring up other things that you haven't thought about in a while. And I know a lot of times that when I listen to beginner content as more of a senior perspective, I still get a little bit from it, because they're going to get a different perspective on the same thing that you've done. And HTML, for me particularly, I don't go back and look at content around HTML very often. So I think that is almost a benefit, in the sense of like, maybe again, you haven't heard about any of the new tags that came out, or you haven't used proper tags recently. Like, maybe you have lacking knowledge that you don't even know you have lacking knowledge on. So not to say that everyone should listen to this. No, for sure. But just another consideration of like, maybe it makes sense to just quickly skim through to make sure that you're not lacking on anything in these like HTML, CSS, and JS courses.
And actually, one little final thing I do want to mention is that I am going to try to, especially since this is for absolute beginners, I am going to try to bring this knowledge to you with kind of visualizations that are non-coding related, or visualizations that I think are going to help you understand if you do not understand coding. And I'm going to use some of these visualizations. There'll be some in common with the video versions. You can go check out our YouTube channel. Maybe by the time this is out, the HTML crash course will actually be there. Maybe not. I'm not sure yet. However, some of the visualizations might be similar. Some of them might be a little bit different, because I modified them for, audio versus video, things like that. So if you're like, hey, you said, this visualization was for this, and now you're saying it's different. They're just visualizations. They're just meant to help you if you do not understand what I'm talking about. It's not like a hardcore, like, this is the visualization for this type of thing. So if all this sounds interesting to you, a bit of a long-winded episode intro, but if all this sounds interesting to you and you want to support the show, you can go and check us out on that Patreon, leave a review or rating on your podcast app, join us in our Discord server, or share this with your friends. And if you want to help out not only yourself, but us as well, you can net yourself up to 20% off a Scrimba Pro plan. You can do that by clicking the link in the show description and the show notes. Full details will be in the show notes on htmlallthethings.com. And remember that we are powered by CodeRabbit. They give you the power of AI code reviews to help cut your code review time in half. And check out that link in the show notes and episode description to net yourself a 14-day free trial, no credit card needed, and just a 2-click sign up with a GitHub or GitLab account. And so let's kind of jump into, some of the meat and potatoes, I feel like we're already served, but the real meat and potatoes of this episode, let's kind of talk about this. So why a crash course? And the reason why I wanted to do this is because it is just a quick kind of overview of everything. Because you can sit there and like obsess over like just accessibility. Like accessibility is a big thing, and HTML does help a lot with accessibility. We're going to talk about that a little bit in this episode. You can obsess over stuff like that. You can obsess over, the best practices for custom attributes, which we will cover if you don't know what that is. And so I want to give foundational knowledge on what is in the topic or in the title, which is HTML, to beginners. And that's effectively what I want to do. And let's just get going. So, like, what is HTML? So it is an acronym, and it stands for Hypertext Markup Language. And it's often referred to as the skeleton of a web page. And just like how a skeleton is made up of bones, HTML is made up of tags, and those tags are actually, they create elements, but for the sake of visualization, I'm not going to go back and say tags, elements. For the sake of just an audio show, we're going to just stick with tags for the sake of this episode. And each tag can roughly be equated to a bone, if you think about that. Now, what are tags? Tags are created by using a less than symbol followed by a tag name, which is a word or a letter. So you would put P for paragraph or IMG for image. And then you end the tag by using a greater than symbol. Now, some tags close themselves and other ones need a closing tag. So a closing tag is, to close a tag, we need to create another tag just like we did before, but we use a / before the tag name. So for example, a paragraph, it needs a beginning and end, right? You can kind of think of tags that need to be closed as tags that need some content or some meat in between them. So a paragraph, you don't just go like, this is a paragraph, and then you don't have any text in it. A paragraph is obviously something that has some words in it, a few sentences, right? Maybe several sentences, what have you. And so you would start your paragraph with a P tag, right? Then you would write all the text of the paragraph that you want inside that paragraph, and then you would then close it with a closing P tag, which is the / and then P. And then of course your less than and greater than symbols. Some of these tags, however, are self-closing tags, and self-closing tags do not need to be paired with a closing tag. They can still be ended with a / placed after the tag name, like, and after any attributes as well. However, in HTML, we do not need to add this /. So for example, if you had an image, you would have an image and then a source attribute. If you don't know what an attribute is, we're going to touch on that. But you would have image and then the source, which would point to the actual image file, like the JPEG or the WebP file. And then you would have a space, your /, and then you would end the tag off. That's before HTML5. In HTML5, that is still valid, but you do not need that / anymore. So the reason why I mention this is because you are, more than likely going to be using HTML5 in all your projects, but you're going to see some people still close their self-closing tags with a / due to habit if they've been in the industry for a while. Some people do it for style, just so that when you're visually reading through, you're like, oh yeah, this tag ends right away. So it is still valid if you want to use it, but it is not required. Now you might be like, okay, I have these tags, and you mentioned, a paragraph, and you mentioned an image, but what else is there? So I have a list here of very common tags that we will end up using. You're going to end up using the HTML tag, of course. You're going to end up using the head tag. You're going to end up using the body tag. And the body is really the one, especially for beginners, where you're going to start your coding journey. So inside of your body tag, so you're going to have an opening body tag and then a closing body tag. The body, or the main kind of meat and potatoes of a web page, goes in between those body tags because it's the body of the web page. There's headings you're going to be using. So headings are going to be H1 through H6. So there's going to be H1, H2, H3, etc., all the way through H6. These are actually extremely important for SEO, which we will talk about in a little bit. We've already talked about a paragraph tag, which is just a P tag. Links. Now this is a bit weird. This is one of those things where there's like exceptions to every rule. A link, you're thinking, is going to be something that's like a clickable link, like a click here, right? Click here to go to this web page. It's actually an A tag, which sounds weird, and it's formally referred to as an anchor tag. However, there is also a link tag, and that is used to very commonly bring in things such as a CSS file, which goes beyond the HTML crash course here. So there is a link tag, but that's not what we're talking about today. So a link, meaning a visual, like a clickable text link, is an A tag. You have your image, which is of course represented by IMG. So you don't have to write the whole word image. It's just IMG inside of the tag. And then you have various lists. So lists are also something that's very important for SEO. And you can have what's called a UL, or an unordered list, and then an OL, or an ordered list. And so your ordered list, of course, will be something like it's ordered by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And an unordered list is just going to be something that's like a point form list that doesn't have those numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc. And each of those list items are literally defined by LI, or a list item tag. And those go inside of either a UL or an OL as you go. Now, you might say, well, you mentioned there's a source for an image, meaning like you need to source the image from a JPEG, for example, or a PNG, or a WebP commonly, or picking up Steam and AVIF file. That source is what's called an attribute. So there are attributes to these tags that you can put in. So common attributes are going to be an href, which is going to be what defines where your link goes. So in an A tag, for example, it's going to define where it goes. So like google.com, google.ca, maybe your website, what have you. The source, I've already mentioned, points to those image attributes. And then an alt tag will describe things such as what is the image. So if it's an image of like a yellow flower, you might put that in your alt text, and that's used by screen readers commonly to get context so that they know what's going on because the person has some visual impairment. It's used in a couple other cases as well, but that's probably the most modern and constant use case for it, and that's why it is important. So sorry, go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, before we jump into the next section here, I do want to kind of point out a couple other attributes that are pretty important, and we'll talk about them a lot more in probably the CSS episode, but just to bring them up here, the ID and the class attribute are going to be seen across the entire HTML file. And what those are is the ability for you to identify either a group of elements that you want to style in the same way with a class. So if you give multiple elements the same class name, then you go out and style it in the same way. Or for ID's sake, if you want to identify a single element in your CSS to style, you would use the ID tag. Those are just kind of like another top of my head, really, really important tag or attributes on HTML. And the other thing about attributes is that not all, like pretty much every tag will have its own custom attributes. Some of them do like work on all tags. So for example, the ID and the class will work on all tags pretty much, but stuff like the href won't, right? The href is really only designed for the A tag. So there's a lot to learn there. We won't get into every single combination that could possibly exist. MDN is probably the best place. W3 School there's plenty of others that can handle this for you, but just know that when you're going through your HTML, you have a plethora of like different options that you can choose for each one, and is getting more sophisticated now. A lot of these input elements will have a lot of extra tags on them. So input, this is actually something that I don't think you talk about in this yet, but yeah, so there's an input tag that will allow you to create form elements. And that input tag could have many different attributes that associated to different style inputs. So like for example, if you want an input with like currency, you would have an attribute that tells it that it's a currency input, so that it would actually limit you, without doing any sort of programming, limit the user to only inputting numbers, for example, right? So you can do a lot of this like pseudo programming, as I like to call it, through tags or through tags and attributes. I should be clear, like the combination of the two, without ever touching JavaScript. And what's becoming more and more popular is relying more heavily on the native HTML, for example, for a form element, versus creating an entire custom, element that does the exact same thing that is already built in a performant way, in a safe way, in a tested way with HTML.
And something here, like I cover this a lot. I've already written a great deal of the script that I'm going to use for the video version of this HTML crash course. But something that, I probably should say now is that what you're ultimately doing, like what Mike is describing, is that by using these different attributes, by using these different tags, you're effectively writing almost like instructions to tell the browser, because the browser reads the HTML and it reads through the HTML text, because effectively what you're doing here is you're writing text with a certain rule set, right? As we're describing as we go through. And then the browser is taking that and interpreting it. And it's going, okay, like I need an input, It needs to be limited to currency, and it knows to describe that, knows to display that, excuse me, and have a bit of logic behind that as well for the currency. Same with the paragraphs. It's like it understands separate paragraphs. It understands separate headings. And it even adds a little bit of default styling to make it look a certain way that we can adjust with, again, CSS and things. Because this is just the skeleton that you're working with here. And so ultimately, like, you might be thinking like, okay, there's all these attributes. There's a lot to memorize here. And yes and no. So there is, however, if you just think of attributes as things that add functionality and information to HTML tags, you'll slowly but surely memorize these things. Like href, sounds like nothing. Like, to someone who doesn't program, you're going to be like, why is href the link? Like, first of all, we're already using an a tag, which is like a little weird. And then why is href the thing, the attribute that I set in order to say like, hey, I want this, this text link to go to Google, or to go to my website, or to go to this document, or to go to a certain point on this page, right? A certain anchor on this page. My point is that as you go through, you'll naturally reach for these things enough times where you'll be like, I know that I need an A tag here. Like, you'll slowly memorize that. I know I need an A tag here. However, I need to link to something. How do I do that? And just a quick Google will like immediately solve your issue. And then you'll slowly remember these attributes. So it's less about, hey, remember all these attributes and remember all these HTML tags and remember this and remember that. You'll slowly but surely just naturally pick it up. And then to me, it's like image source is very, very like second nature. Adding an alt to the image is very second nature. Linking with an actual link tag to my CSS is a very natural thing. Doing my A tags, my anchor tags, which are my like kind of real world links, I guess I'll call them, my A tags, and having a href with them is very, very second nature. If I want them to open in a new tab, doing my target _ blank is also very second nature. And that's another attribute you're setting. You're setting your target to something specific again. So I know that if you're listening to this and you're absolutely new to programming and you're absolutely new to this and you're like, my God, there's a lot of memorization. Yes, there is kind of, but it's more natural. Like, just even think about the nature of the body tag. Like, it, yeah, you have to memorize, I guess, that it's called a body, but it's kind of naturally the body, right? Like, it's the body of the document. Like, we recognize that it's kind of like, basic English. It's basic understanding of like, okay, like some of this stuff is just going to kind of flow naturally when you like learn it and understand it. And then if you want to get into like, slightly more advanced than, let's say, this crash course is, you can actually set your own custom attributes. Now, I do want to mention this in particular because sometimes as you're memorizing, you may you may mismemorize, I suppose. You may mismemorize this and name of an attribute. You'll misname it, and it'll be like, you'll name it like, let's just say you want an attribute to see if an element or whatever, a set of tags is mat for some reason. So you might just literally create like a mat equals yes or no, right? That's your attribute. That's actually incorrect. Here's the thing though, is the browser will still render it. And as far as I know, JavaScript will still grab that thing. It'll still use it. You could even change it from yes to no in your JavaScript, which is your logic layer, which again, we're not only going to very briefly touch on today. But the point is that's actually incorrect HTML, and you've actually broken a rule here. The reason why I wanted to mention this in this crash course is if you break a rule in HTML, sometimes it will visually break things. Like, you'll just all of a sudden have a bunch of bullet points because you forgot to close out your unordered list, for example. But oftentimes you make a mistake in HTML. It doesn't just crash. It doesn't say error. It doesn't say, yo, that's not the right attribute. What you should do for custom attribute is you need to add data dash, like the name of the attribute, data dash, and then the name of the attribute. So in this case, you'd put data dash mat, and that's the rule. But even if you broke it, your web page will likely still work fine. Your JavaScript will likely still be able to access everything it needs to. And unless you have some sort of like compiler or something, which is well beyond the case, well beyond the contents of this episode, but ultimately it'll just keep working and you'll think it's fine. And in fact, our first few websites, I just thought attributes were just, I could just set them to whatever. Like, obviously there's some that are reserved, like ref and things that we've already discussed. But then I thought I could add my own attributes. Like, the instant I learned that, I was like, oh, this is awesome. And I was messing around with stuff and whatever. And unfortunately, like, I was breaking the rules of HTML. And so I just want to drive that home in this crash course, that there isn't going to be like a blatant error for everything. It isn't going to be like, let's say you're making an Android app and now the Android app has crashed or something, or it won't compile or what have you. It may still continue to work, but you still made a mistake. And valid HTML is extremely important because you're making the skeleton of the website. It's really the very first layer. And it's also what a lot of bots, which we'll get into in the SEO section of this episode, it's what a lot of bots will actually read and understand in order to get context on the web page. Because let's be serious. We've all been to websites where there's like a crazy like dancing, robot or something, or like a crazy slider that like flips upside down and is a 3D cube and all these things. Google didn't ask about that. And Google's crawler bot for SEO did not ask about that. And so the HTML is ultimately what makes all the difference. And you want as clear of a skeleton. In reality, you can almost think of it as you want as clear of a map for Google's bot to read and understand. Because Google's bot is just a bot and it's doing it quickly. It can misinterpret things. And then all of a sudden your page isn't being ranked properly or for the right keywords because you've messed up your HTML. And this is another reason why I want to do this crash course. And even Mike's like, it's good as a refresher for people who are experienced. But many people toss away their HTML. They just think HTML is easy. It's really, it's so simple. Like, who would mess it up? But just being so blunt and so like dismissive of it, I've seen so many, and I've helped so many clients now fix their SEO by literally just fixing their HTML. And all of a sudden, like, the rankings go higher and higher and higher. It's because they've messed up things. And I'll get into that detail as we enter that section of the episode.
I think just to also provide some reasoning behind the rules that aren't like strictly followed. One of those reasons is because HTML is still an evolving language. Like, it's still like they're still working on it. And what you can do with a custom attribute, especially if you name it something very relevant, is you can accidentally name it something that eventually will be used down the line. And therefore that would actually break your configuration, because if you put something wrong in that attribute from the get-go, and then all of a sudden it's there in the HTML spec in 5 years, something will go wrong on your page. So that's one reason. There's a couple of other side reasons that are a little bit more advanced. One of them being like the fact that frameworks use HTML in different ways and parse it in different ways. So if you ever want to like take your site and put it into a more advanced framework and you put a bunch of custom attributes in there that aren't part to spec, it could break that transition. Anyway, the point I'm trying to say is that what Matt is saying is pretty important. Don't just yeet, a bunch of custom attributes in there for no reason. Data dash anything will work, and it will always work forever because that's what is in the spec. If you go around that, then most likely you'll be fine. Let me be clear. You're not going to, your website's not going to explode, but the reality is like you're just making an unhealthy situation happen that could have a negative side effect for literally no reason, because the data dash exists for that purpose. And just an example of where you would use a data dash attribute, like a custom attribute. A lot of the time in testing, like when you're testing a web page, you need to see if an element exists on a page, a specific one. A lot of times that's done through, data dash test ID 1 or something like that, right? And then you put whatever there. So, and then you, in your JavaScript during the actual testing phase, you'll see if that element exists because it's very specific to that one thing. So lots of different reasons you would use it. There's a lot of programming related reasons you would use it that we might get into in the JavaScript side of things. But yeah, that's the high level.
And like, I mean, that's a really good point, because like, I mean, like even CSS, even JavaScript, they're changing over time. They're being updated, and it's just another reason why you don't want, like don't break the rules and just create another potential issue. Like, this is the very first layer. As you keep learning new web development skills, you'll start learning that this is like an onion, and it's like another layer, another layer, another layer, another thing to know, another thing to learn. And there's going to be mistakes naturally because there's so many layers. There's going to be mistakes, things update, things change. And you want to make it as smooth as possible within reason. So just like have valid HTML, you know what I mean? Like, just make sure it's valid, because you don't want something to go right down to the core or the skeleton and be incorrect, basically. And I'm going to move on to semantic HTML in a second here and explain that. But I want one final basic note, because I have actually seen people make this mistakes make this mistake, and it is that the browser actually reads the HTML from the top to the bottom. So your HTML document structure is important. If you place your footer on lines 1 through 5 and then your main body content on lines 6 through 10, your main body will appear below your footer. And that sounds silly. You're going to be like, Matt, why are you saying that? Some people, I've seen it where they'll put like a nav where, you naturally assume the nav 9 out of 10 times is at the top. They'll put the nav, they'll be like, oh shoot, I made this whole page and I forgot to put my nav bar list, my list of links. Let me just put a quick nav here. They add it to the bottom. I've seen newbie programmers do this, and they just assume that the browser knows to put the nav at the top. That's just not the case. So the order of what you're writing actually does make sense. So if you're like comparing this to our skeleton example, you would start at the skull, you would go down to like the torso, then maybe the arms, because they're kind of on the same level, the arms, and then eventually the pelvis and the legs, the feet, that type of thing. You want to go top to bottom with this thing. You don't want to just randomly like throw things around, assuming the browser understands that the footer is supposed to be at the bottom and the nav's at the top, things like that. That's not going to work out. And I've just mentioned some things that you may not understand. You might be like, hey, some of those tags you mentioned are, they have specific names like nav. That is called semantic HTML. And semantic HTML is like HTML. You can like a lot of what we have in modern UI is actually just a bunch of boxes. If we really think about it, like you could draw a box around the nav, you can draw a box around the image, you can draw a box around these other, all these other things, all these other elements that are on the page. And so at the end of the day, what a lot of developers do is they use what's called divs. So it's an element called div or divs, and they use it for everything. It's like a general use div. It's like a divider, and it's just like, oh, like make my content box, but like there's no content box HTML tag, so I'm going to make it out of a div. And then I'll style it like a content box, like a little square around my news story, for example. That starts getting out of hand because a div is so general, and they start using it for everything. So one of the main things that right at the top of your body 9 out of 10 times is the navigation, and a lot of people will make the nav bar out of the div, out of a whole bunch of divs, a bunch of different boxes, a bunch of divs. And that's not what you want. You want it to be made out of the nav element and the nav HTML tag, literally NAV. The reason why we want to do that is because if we go back to the skeleton example, let's just take a scenario in which you've broken your arm, and so you go to the doctor. You don't want to go there and say, I've broken a bone. The doctor's gonna be like, what's wrong with you? I've broken a bone. Well, okay, what's broken? So the doctor's like, what is he left to do? He's gonna have to check to see if your ribs are all right, your skull's okay, your feet, your fingers, your eye sockets. Like, I've broken a bone, help me. But if you go to the doctor and you say, I've broken my arm, he might ask extra details like left or right, but immediately that diagnostic time has been cut right down. So if we think about the things that read semantic HTML, such as screen readers for accessibility reasons, such as Google crawling bots and other SEO bots and other bots, AI bots probably now, to understand the structure, they need as much context as possible to understand what's going on the web page. So you should name or use as much semantic HTML as possible. If you have a nav element, if you need a navigation bar on your web page, you should be using the nav element. For example, if you have a paragraph, you shouldn't style or make divs filled with text look like paragraphs. You should use the paragraph element as many times as you need. Because this tells those bots, just like how you told the doctor, I broke my arm, instead of I broke my bone, it tells those bots, these are my paragraphs. This is my navigation area. These are my, and there can be divs in there. These are my enter in question mark here. And so it has to discern a little bit. These bots are getting more intelligent, but you want to make that map. You want to make that skeleton. You want to make that diagnostic procedure in the skeleton example with the doctor. You want to make that as smooth as possible. You don't want to be in the waiting room going for an x-ray on all your ribs and your hands and your feet and your arms and your legs and your face when you could just be like, my arm is broken. I've injured my arm. So that's why semantic HTML is so important. And what this ultimately does as well is semantic HTML really helps with SEO as well. Now, I just want to like state something before I jump in, because I'm about to jump into the HTML plus SEO like section of this episode. We're kind of done the general crash course. There's a lot more to learn, and the HTML crash course on the YouTube channel is gonna have a lot of visuals and things that are gonna help you. I already have over a page of script. For the sake of an audio show, I'm not gonna be like, we're gonna set up doc type. Okay, we're gonna do a less than symbol, exclamation mark symbol, space, all caps, doc type. We're not gonna go through that, but we will do stuff like that, obviously with a visual element on the YouTube channel. So go check that out. But I wanted to mention HTML and SEO here right beside the semantic HTML, because I've already mentioned the Google bot and mentioned other things, accessibility, which is, arguably more important than SEO, but you may as well do it because you get both benefits. You get better accessibility if you do semantic HTML, and you get better SEO. But HTML is often seen as a throwaway skill. It's easy, whatever. But in reality, the cleanliness and the structure of your HTML is very, very crucial to your SEO. So I want to be clear that this part of the crash course is probably a little more advanced. So if you're struggling to understand what HTML is from what we've already said in this episode, or from what I've already said in this episode, that's totally fine. Don't be discouraged. Just know that just you can listen to this next part and just kind of generally get an understanding, because as you go to learn future skills like CSS and JavaScript and maybe React or like a Svelte or SvelteKit or whatever, as you go to learn new things, you'll pick up more and more about SEO, because you'll start to make projects, and those projects need that SEO angle. And so again, if you're like a total beginner and you're like, man, like I don't think I can learn this SEO stuff. Again, if you just listen to this and have a very, very general understanding, that's totally fine, because you'll start picking this stuff up naturally. And if you don't, you'll eventually, in your learning journey, be like, that's it, I got to learn SEO one day, and then you'll just learn it. So then you'll sit down and you'll learn that part. But let's jump into this part. So search engines read HTML to understand your website. Just straight up. They do not care about your sliders. They don't care about your fancy dance and mascots. They don't care if your website is on a 3D cube and each page is another side of the cube. They do not care about this. There is an extreme importance on HTML when it comes to a bot and it comes to SEO. When these bots go to read your website, they want to understand what these things are. For example, the Google bot may look at your nav element, hopefully named that way semantically, your nav element, and go like, oh, I want to index this whole website. This is where the rubber hits the road here. We got an About Us page link. We got a blog page link. We got a Contact Us link. Okay. You see where it starts to make sense, where they're like, okay, nav, here we go, right? We don't want divs. We want to point the bot in the right direction. And I'm going to honestly say the most important thing, I mentioned the nav a bunch. The most important SEO tag that I see, especially in blogs, are the heading tags. We mentioned those, the H1 through the H6. These are so crucial because Google sees these as a hierarchy of importance. Google sees this as at the very top, generally at the very top of the page, or let's just say the hierarchy instead of talking visually on the page. H1 is the most important heading on the page. And it's going to take that as, oh, okay, that's the most important one. Many people will think that H1 is the biggest visually. That's not the case. H1 is the most important. Often it's the biggest visually, but it can be the smallest. Google doesn't care. Google doesn't care if it's 4 pixels and everything else is 12 pixels font size. They don't care about that. They care about H1 is the most important, then H2, then H3, then H4, all the way through H6. And then you also have other SEO specific tags, such as there's a title tag and there's various meta tags. In this case, I'll talk about meta description. These are critical for search results. If you look on a what's called a SERP, search engine results page, you just Google anything. It's going to list blue links, at least as of recording this, who knows in a few years, but blue links with a small description underneath. The blue link is generally the title, and the description is this meta description. And this comes from your HTML. Now, Google reserves the right and indeed does change the title and description depending on if they think what you wrote is irrelevant. Like if they think that's irrelevant, then they may change it. But these are what's presented to Google. And again, we're trying to make this easy to Google to understand what's going on. And this also goes for Bing and things as well. I keep mentioning Google because it's the biggest search engine, but Bing is not a slouch either. I mean, you could still get thousands and thousands of clicks from Bing, for example, and other things like DuckDuckGo as well. Also, anchor text, otherwise known as linked text. So many times people, and myself included, like I'm not saying I'm perfect in it by any means with any of these, they'll just put click here, but Google doesn't really understand what click here means. But it does understand what click here to go to Google means. So if you have a link that goes to google.ca and you literally put in your anchor tags and your A tags, the text, like click here to go to Google, and make that whole sentence a clickable link, that's called like a descriptive link. And Google goes like, oh, maybe I need to follow this, or at least I understand where it's going. They also see the URL, of course, but give it the description. You're trying to guide Google around. And this is, oh, Google's talking to me in the background saying it didn't understand. But the point is that, I don't know if you could hear that actually, because my mic has so many like compressors and stuff on it, but there's a Google Home in my house that's talking to me, telling me like that didn't understand. But the whole point is that you're trying to help Google make out where to go. So one of the things that's a little bit more of an advanced SEO topic is called interlinking. And you'll just see this on blogs where it's like you read a blog post on something and then it'll say like, hey, these are some other blog posts that you might be interested in. That's interlinking because it links to the same blog, right? They want you to stay on that website. They want you to keep reading. And so Google will want to, it'll read the page, it'll go to that related articles and it'll be like, should I follow these? You want to kind of entice it with those titles. Like maybe you've been talking about semantic HTML in a blog post just a little bit, right? In a guide, you've been writing about it. And then you have a link that says, click here to go to my semantic HTML guide. Google goes, oh, that's related. And it goes right to it. And then it starts indexing that next page. You want to help Google as much as possible. Alt attribute, already mentioned that. I'll just touch on it briefly. The alt attribute for images, this is used in image search, as well as accessibility, which I already mentioned the accessibility part. This is also used in image search. It describes the image to Google. Google's getting more intelligent. AI especially, it's like, AI can kind of like go to an image and be like, that's a picture of a dog. But again, you still want to make a clear, concise skeleton or map for these things to understand. And then comes structured data. This is very advanced. So if you're an absolute beginner, this is probably going to go over your head. And in fact, I'm just starting to learn some of this for SEO purposes because usually I had CMSs generate this for me, to be honest. Structured data, this helps define what pages are by setting certain attributes in a certain way. Now, you might be like, if you're more experienced, you might be like, Matt, this is done in a script tag, so this actually is not HTML. The reason why I'm touching on it in this episode is because oftentimes it's pasted into the HTML file in a static way. Even with some CMS, you do that. And especially if someone here is learning SEO for the first time, they're definitely going to be probably manually writing these to try to like understand what's going on. So for example, on our website right now, as of writing this might change. Each episode of the podcast show notes on htmlallthethings.com has some structured data behind it that lists various things. It literally tells Google, this is a podcast episode. This is the number. This is the link to the file, the MP3 where it's hosted. This is the description. This is when it came out. Things like that. And there's a bunch of attributes you can set. And this is just a pure, like, Google, hey, this is a podcast episode. Or any app that can read this, hey, this is a podcast episode and it's number 400 and it's number this and this is the description. It's so there's no interpretation. All these things, as you probably gathered at this point, are trying to guide Google in a certain way. Hey, Google, do this. I said the word. She's gonna start talking to me. She's talking to me, Mike. Okay, there. I typed no, like I kept tapping the button because I have a screen and she kept talking to me. But anyway, the point is that with this structured data stuff, this is a very direct, this is almost like your direct line. You can just literally say, hey, these are like, don't interpret this stuff. This is what it means. And there's ones for blog posts. There's ones for other things as well. So you can go and check that out. This is very advanced, I'm gonna be clear. So like in comparison to just learning an HTML crash course, but just something for you to understand that there's a way to directly tell Google with the structured data, and I'll leave it at that.
With that, just want to mention that like Google will tell you certain things on how to tell them and then change those things about 14,000 times. So you might be changing your structured data weekly, monthly, bi-monthly. Like this stuff is complicated, not because of the fact that it's complicated from like a code perspective. This stuff is complicated because Google and other search engines and other search criteria and AI now have different interpretations of how they check the structured data.
Mm-hmm.
And I can guarantee you, if you get into a marketing situation where you're at a company and you're working on a site that's very heavily reliant on SEO, you're going to spend a ton of time in here, a ton of time in the structured data side of things. And I have personal experience with this. We're recently going through something on the project that we're working on, trying to make it so that Google can see that some of our pages are video pages, right? Like that's done through structured data. We've changed it. It's been a year and a half. Let me just say this. It's been a year and a half process that we still have not nailed down because of the fact that Google consistently changes the side of that side of things. And we have a little bit of a more complex situation because of JavaScript. So like, it's not like a straightforward, just HTML video page, but regardless, Matt's saying this is complicated. It's complicated for many, many different reasons, but yeah, this is complicated stuff. Like this is annoying stuff, even more than complicated, I would say.
I mean, not that we want to like jump into the weeds on structured data, but like there's so many ways to configure it as well. And many of the fields are optional. Many of the fields are like maybe not applicable to you and things like that.
Deprecated.
Deprecated. And so I've gone to like other websites that are competing and I'll be like, hey, like how are they doing their podcast thing? And this person has, 10 things set. This person has 2. So the person has 4. So the person has 1. And it's like, what? And so like I just kind of like picked and chose like, okay, let's get some easy ones that we can do that like define it close enough to like how a human would define it to me, and then I can change it. My point of bringing this up is that SEO, like we're trying to guide Google, like I mentioned so many times, we're trying to guide Google. Because there's so many ways to guide it and so many ways to like manipulate it, and the same with structured data, there's so many different attributes that there is strategies in here where like this person may find great success by removing 8 of the things they've set in their structured data and only have 3 left. This other person might have 3 and it's not enough and they need 8. They need 10. They need 8, or maybe they had 9 of the 10 that was like, the ideal, and they added that one and now their site's being ranked well and things like that. You're constantly changing, you're constantly moving around. And honestly, SEO is marketing at the end of the day. Like you're trying to market. Think about like commercials from the early 2000s to now. Like how many times have we flipped through and changed? That's a lot, right? So SEO is kind of a similar thing. At the end of the day, this is kind of the, kind of like winding down of the episode. At the end of the day here, you want clean HTML. No broken tags, proper nesting, which I'll get into in the actual video version. I'm not going to try to describe nesting visually or in an audio thing, because that's a whole other thing. But, proper nesting, no broken HTML, as in like no weird attributes that don't make sense, or like broken ones like we mentioned without the data dash, no custom attributes that way. You want to have clean HTML to help with crawlability. And crawlability means this Google and Bing and whoever else, all the search engines have these bots that go around and just like look at websites all the time. And you have to think about it really like a resume. A resume, you apply to a job, 100 people may have applied to a job. They're not taking 100 hours, an hour each, to like research you and read your resume and things. They're going quickly and filtering through and going. I kind of think of like a Google crawler as doing that on my website. So I want the information that it's expecting there as immediately as possible, as quickly as possible. It's easy to understand, so it can go and be like, what is this podcast episode? It's episode 325. It was released in May of this. Okay, here is the description. The description is about HTML. Okay, good. And boom. That's what you ultimately want from your HTML. You don't want to leave anything up to question, because if you do, then it'll misinterpret. For some reason, I'll say this now, for some reason it took one of my websites and it put Mike and my office, which we don't have an office, a public office, it put a pin beside one of our customers on Google Maps. And like I went to go check his Google Map one day, and I was like, wait, why am I there? And I checked it. It was like Google for some reason like followed a link, and it was a total mess up. Like I reported it, and Google Maps fixed it within like 5 minutes. So it was clearly like an error. But the point is that happens, and think about how many like times that happens in a day, because it just removed right away. It was like, hey, sorry, this is a like this is a mistake. This is not where Matt is or whatever. But yeah, I think. I mean, as a conclusion, if you're still listening to this and you are a complete beginner, learn HTML, learn, what it is and how it works, and keep in mind that, you're probably hearing from people like, go quickly through HTML, just quickly rush it and this and that. Don't master it, but learn it well. It is not a throwaway skill. We mentioned all the importance of it already. We mentioned that you can mess it up and it will still keep working. So how many people have like just skipped through HTML and then their websites are just, filled with errors in their HTML? And I make errors too. That's what I'm saying. Like, I'm certainly older projects, I'm messing up some of the stuff in my HTML. But learning good and clean HTML helps SEO, and SEO is something that we all strive for with websites that want organic traffic. And I just want to say as a final note, don't get stuck in the weeds of SEO and your learning journey. If you just listen and generally understand this stuff at a high level, especially the HTML or the SEO stuff, you're already ahead of the game. Many people, when they talk about HTML, they don't really talk about SEO too much. At the end of the day here, you're already ahead of the race. Just slowly but surely, you'll start to understand SEO. And if at some point you're still like, I don't get it, you can then, probably having learned HTML, CSS, JS, and maybe something else, at that point, you're like, now I need to learn SEO. Or now I need to fill in some blanks about my SEO, because you'll pick up a lot along the way as you build websites, as I'm sure, as we did. So
I think that's good advice for anything that you're learning. Don't get stuck in the weeds. Go out and try to build. Go out and try to, learn the next thing. You don't have to learn everything 100% before you move on to the next thing. That's really the lesson there, and that's a really, really good lesson to learn. Otherwise, you're going to be stuck in something called tutorial hell, which we've talked about a million times. So, yeah, good point, Matt.
And just there is a link if you're like, hey, I actually want to learn more about semantic HTML. Like I'm actually experienced in HTML and things. I do actually have a semantic HTML episode that I did at the end of 2024, like literally released on December 17th of 2024. So I have a link to that in the show notes on htmlthings.com. The episode is titled, if you're listening to this in the car and you want to type it in or something when you stop, don't type when you're driving. It's called Stop Using Divs for Everything, Master Semantic HTML, Custom Attributes, and Accessibility. You can go and check that out. I mean, everywhere I just said. But I think that's it. I don't know if you have anything else to add, Mike. It was less of a conversational episode, certainly, and more of a lecture, but like that, I mean, it kind of is that. So let us know, you, the listener. Let us know if you liked this, did not like it, whatever. I think it's probably going to do better on YouTube with the visual element. However, if anyone who, doesn't have time to watch YouTube videos and is just listening to this in their commute, hopefully it was helpful. We may try the CSS and the JS in the coming weeks. But if you are like worried I'm going to go all just basic stuff, don't worry. Mike's still writing his episodes and I may ditch this idea in an audio form. Who knows? We'll figure that part out. But if you're interested in supporting episodes like this, you can do so on Patreon at patreon.com/HTMLthings. Many thanks to our $3 tier patrons: Tim from the Web Hacker on thewebhacker.com, Jason from Geek Life Radio via geekliferadio.com, Garrett Segal, Level Up Financial Planning via www.levelupfinancialplanning.com, Magnus from YesWeb via yesweb.se, Syntaxify from the HTML All the Things Discord server, and Stacy Mosseler from the website swoonworthydesigns.com. Remember that we are powered by Code Rabbit. You can go and net yourself some AI code reviews, help cut your code review time in half, and check out the link in the show notes and episode description to net yourself a 14-day free trial, no credit card needed, and just a 2-click sign up with a GitHub or GitLab account. And if you want to net yourself up to 20% off a Scrimba Pro plan and take some courses in HTML and many, many other things, you can do so via the link in the show description and the show notes. That link is scrimba.com/links/HTML, all the things. And that's it. I think that's it, Mike. I'm closing this. We're signing off.
You've been listening to HTML All the Things podcast. Web development, web design, and small business. We hope you've gotten some useful and practical information from this show, and we hope you appreciate that we talk to you like human beings, and we hope you had some fun. We'll be back soon, but in the meantime, hit us up on social media on Facebook, Instagram, and Patreon at HTML All the Things, and on Twitter at HTML Everything. Until next time, this is HTML All the Things, signing off.